With about 10 or so games remaining in the regular season at the time of this video, there's plenty to talk about around the NBA as it relates to the current rosters. The race for which non-LeBron-led team will represent the East in the finals, various awards races, and the continued search for any kind of sign that there are legit challengers to the Warriors' chase for yet another championship. But apart from all that, there's always an incredible amount of intrigue when it comes to the NBA offseason, and more specifically free agency. Player movement has become a hallmark of what makes the league so entertaining to the modern fan, and with a lot of high-profile stars potentially on the move this summer, I wanted to take a look at the 5 most commonly discussed free agency destinations and rank them in order. First through a handful of separate categories, and then combining those together to give an overall ranking. With that said, welcome back everybody, my name is Tucker, and in today's video I'm going to be looking at the free agency viability of the Knicks, Clippers, Lakers, Mavs, and Nets. Now, some of these categories, some of these evaluations are based entirely on numbers, and so they are objective, while others are subjective in my opinion. And with those, I would obviously like to see what you guys have to say down in the comment section below. Let me know which of these teams you think are the best free agency destinations. But with all that said, let's go ahead and get into it. The first category is one that is not going to take very long, and it is one of those objective numbers-based ones that I talked about, and that is simply the amount of cap space available this summer. And the ranking for this is the Knicks, followed by the Clippers, then the Nets, Mavs, and Lakers. You can see the salary cap amounts on screen. I'm not going to read them out loud, but just so we're all on the same page about who does have the most cap space, like I said, you can see on screen there. The second thing that I think is important to look at here is just how good each of these teams are going into the summer of 2019, and that just, in my opinion, increases the viability of a free agency destination as if they're not complete and utter trash before a player gets there. With that in mind, in this category, this is how I rank each of those free agency destinations. Number 1, the LA Clippers. They are one of only 2 projected playoff teams out of this group of 5, and they're the better team more than likely and in the tougher conference than the next team that I'm going to talk about, and that is the Brooklyn Nets, who look to be a playoff team in the East. They have a lot of really good pieces that could be potentially surrounding a star moving forward, which we're going to talk about in a different category. Number 3 is going to be the Lakers, simply because they have LeBron and the young guys, and you could probably put them ahead of the Nets in this, and maybe even the Clippers as well if they'd had a better season, but I don't really think that it's fair to put the Lakers in front of the Nets or the Clippers when they're not even going to be in the playoffs this year, even though obviously there's the difference in conferences from East to West. Number 4 is going to be the Mavs because they still have Luka, and they're really only late season tanking, and that's why their record is going to be so bad. And number 5 is the Knicks because they're awful and they're tanking this year. The next category is going to be the ability for each of these teams to create 2 max cap space slots. And the reason why this is important is because for a lot of these free agents, part of the draw of going to these teams is going to be teaming up with another big time free agent. And if a team has the ability to bring in 2 max contract level players, then that is certainly a game changer and should certainly put them higher up in the rankings in this specific category than some of the other teams that don't have the opportunity to have that much cap space. In this ranking at number 1, you have the Knicks, which is not surprising because, like I said earlier, they have the most cap space available, and they made sure of that when they traded away Kristaps Porzingis and dumped some contracts in the process. Number 2 is the LA Clippers, and even though they don't have 2 max slots available at the moment, they can create it fairly easily by trading away the contract of Danilo Gallinari, who, even though he's having a very good season this year, would probably be on the trade block if they felt like they could sign 2 max guys. It would be relatively easy to trade a player of Gallo's caliber on an expiring contract to create those 2 max cap space slots. Number 3 is going to be the Nets. They are also not in position currently to have 2 max slots, and there's some contingencies here that need to be taken care of. The first is I don't really know what's going to happen with the D'Angelo Russell extension, but putting that aside, if the team was able to trade away Allen Crabbe's $18 million expiring contract in the offseason, then they would be able to create 2 full max contract slots, again, completely setting aside the D'Lo extension, which I don't really want to speculate on. And then last up are the Mavs and Lakers, both tied for 4th because neither of them can realistically create a second max contract slot this offseason. The Mavs, however, it's worth noting that they could possibly have another max slot in 2020, depending on the Kristaps Porzingis extension either this offseason or next. The next category now is one of those subjective ones again, and that is the pieces around the potential star or stars in this case that could be signing with these teams. It's important to not just have all this cap space, but also have good players currently on the roster to surround your stars with. This is also probably going to be the most controversial section of the video because I had a lot of trouble ranking this, and you could really put them in any order that you like. First up though, I had to go with the Lakers simply because LeBron is still there and they do have some really solid young guys around him. Even though they can only bring in one star, the core of that team is still very much there. They just need some help for sure. Number 2 now is going to be the Dallas Mavericks because they have a hopefully healthy Kristaps Porzingis and Luka Doncic as well, and those are 2 really, really good young players to go forward with, potentially to surround another star. Number 3 is going to be the Brooklyn Nets. They don't have really 2 stars like the Mavs do, which is why they're down at 3, but they do have D'Angelo Russell, again, extension pending. They also have guys like Karis LeVert, Spencer Dinwiddie, Jared Allen that are really complementary guys that really fit in well with a potential star or 2. Number 4 is going to be the Knicks with Dennis Smith Jr., Kevin Knox, Mitchell Robinson, plus the possibility of having a top 5 pick, potentially even the number 1 overall pick. The only reason that the Knicks are not higher than this is because I just don't know the value of that pick right now. And the difference between getting the first pick and getting the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and 5th, in my opinion, is a pretty large gap. But that pick definitely vaults them up ahead of our 5th team, which is the Clippers. The reason they're so far down is because I'm assuming in this circumstance that Danilo Gallinari is going to be gone, because again, I'm anticipating them creating 2 max contract slots. But if that's different and Gallo's still on the team, then they would be higher because they do have some young, cheap players like Landry Shamet, in addition to veteran guys like Lou Williams. The next category now is going to be one that's going to create a good amount of discussion once again, and that is the coaching/front office prowess of each of these teams, because I think it's important that each of these stars feel like they're going into a good situation, a situation that has a good coach, that has a front office that knows what they're doing and has had a history of good moves before they get there. And with that in mind, tied for the first spot is going to be both the Clippers and the Nets. The Clippers recovered from the Lob City era very, very quickly, and they're well coached by Doc Rivers, and once again have a good amount of young pieces to surround a potential star with. And the Nets came out of the awful Billy King era without really much to work with, and came out of it with some really good young players and a ton of flexibility. And Kenny Atkinson is a pretty solid coach, and one that will obviously continue to grow moving forward. After that now is the Dallas Mavericks, because traditionally they draft well. They always seem to find under-the-radar players, whether they're undrafted or later round picks, and they had that extremely shrewd move to trade for Kristaps Porzingis, in addition to the fact that Rick Carlisle and just the front office in general seem to be on the same page pretty well, and Rick Carlisle is one of the better coaches in the league, and certainly one that's not talked about enough. Second to last in this ranking is the Lakers, because they signed LeBron James, and that's pretty much it. They have drafted some good players, but it's basically because they've been at the top of the draft every time. Lonzo is valuable, but players like De'Aaron Fox have shown to be better so far, and he was drafted after Lonzo was. They let Julius Randle and Brook Lopez walk this past offseason, when both of them would have been extremely helpful for this year's team. They traded D'Angelo Russell, traded Zubac away from Muscala, who's been awful for them, and all of the free agency signings outside of signing LeBron this past offseason were pretty questionable, and their coaching situation is entirely up in the air because it seems like Luke Walton will not be there next year. And then last is the Knicks, simply because organizationally they've had a ton of issues. They've been in the news lately, even with some things that James Dolan has said and done. And in general, from a coaching, front office, organizational perspective for the last 10 or 15 years, the Knicks have been an absolute dumpster fire, and that has to come into the equation when considering these rankings. And so now we get to the final rankings, and to be clear, this is not scientific in any way. There are, I'm sure, other more mathematical, better ways to fully rank these teams, but this is just for fun. This is the way that I wanted to put it together. So I'm going to be adding up where each of these teams ranked in each of those categories, and then dividing it by 5, because there were 5 categories, and you want to have as low of a number as possible, because that means you are closer to 1 than you are to 5. And with that in mind, from bottom to top, from worst to last, the rankings for these 5 free agency destinations are the Lakers with a 3.2, followed by the Mavericks also with a 3.2, followed by the Knicks with a 3, the Nets with a 2.4, and the Clippers, according to these rankings, are the best free agency destination across all of these categories with a 2.2. Now, like I said, these are my own opinions talking about, how good of a team they are this year and how good those pieces are moving forward. And those are subjective things. So these rankings could change based off what you personally think about each of those categories. The other thing that I didn't mention in this video is location, which I'm sure is extremely important to some free agents and really not that important to others. So I didn't feel the need to mention the fact that it's LA or the fact that it's New York, just because it just seemed unnecessary, and it would really just put the Mavs at a huge disadvantage, and they're already down at the bottom anyway, so it really wouldn't have impacted it that much. The other thing to keep in mind is that this is not weighted in any way. I am taking, all of these categories as equally important. So for some free agents, maybe, having another star, having the possibility of another star being able to come with them, having 2 max cap space slots is not all that important to them. So maybe it's weighted differently. So like I said, it's not a hugely scientific endeavor that I've gone through here. I just thought it would be interesting to give my own take on where each of these teams rank and not just sit here and talk about this, that, and the other thing and saying, oh, they're better than this because of that, but to break it down a little bit more into categories and just kind of letting these numbers speak for themselves at the end. And yeah, there you go. That is going to be the end of today's video, ranking each of these 5 NBA free agency destinations from worst to best. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed today's video. If you missed any of my previous videos, then be sure to check out the boxes on screen. Thanks again, and I'll see you all next time.